Hi everyone, my name is Jonathan Beltran, and in this second video I'll be explaining my rationale for the book that I chose to read to my students, Just Critters Who Care by Mercer Mayer. Now, this book was published in 2010, and the reason why I picked this book was because it reminded me of when I was in kindergarten through elementary school. I really enjoyed these books, The Little Critters. Back then, The Little Critters, those books, they really taught what happens if you get lost, what to do, find the police officer, or what happens when you're with your mom, how you should behave and listen. So it really taught lessons, and it was really helpful as a young child and a student or a son to my mom and dad and then my guardians, how I should behave. And it's a really important lesson that I want my students to learn. So that's why I picked this book. Now, the process I took in preparing to read this story, Just Critters Who Care, is no doubt I read it, I reread it, and then I analyzed where best I could stop and ask questions and then continue on. And then after I did that, how could I tie the whole story into why we picked this story, what went on in this story, how it ended, and then personal applications for my students. I wanted them to get the point that we're not just learning about critters who care, but how they can care, how my students can care. So I really focused in on the book and found the key points on where I can highlight those so that my students would get the point for why it's important to be caring. Before I started this read aloud, I thought it might be simple, but I knew when something seems easy, there's generally something behind it that's not so easy to see at first. And that was, how can I read the story with not just reading it, but how can I read it and hit those key main points so that way my tone of voice and everything would fluctuate appropriately to get the main points across to my students. When I was reading this story, I was trying to formulate in my mind, is this a good place to stop? No, I remember this part's coming up, so I'll stop here. That's what was going on in my mind, and at the same time, will my students be able to grasp why I'm choosing this moment to stop and ask a question? And then at the end of the video, at the end of the reading in the video from part 1, I asked questions that I had already asked, and then I asked some questions that made it more personal. Now, apart from the critters helping, what are some reasons and examples that my students help? Well, when they see their friends, a family member, so it really drove home the point, hey, it's not just critters that are caring, it's also me, also my friends. Like, they can make a personal application to it. So that's something that I was looking and thinking on at the end of the video. Now, for the children's reactions to this book before, as you can see in the first video, the student picked out this story, Just Critters Who Care, because they saw the little critter helping, the sister critter helping, the grandma bunny, and then dad way over here. So the student noticed that they were helping and being helpful, so they wanted to pick this book. Now, during this story, they started getting a little distracted because it did go longer because of the added questions, but they were still engaged. And at the end of the story, I had almost completely lost this student because too much time had gone by, but they were still focused and involved because at the end of the video, there was cookies, and I made sure to drive the point that my students love cookies, so they focused along at the very end, and their thoughts were really positive, and they really got the point of why they should help. One of the strengths that I felt during the read aloud for Just Critters Who Care was the questions that I had asked, that I posed to the students. They weren't just questions about the story. I took it one step further, apart from asking questions about the story, but asking how those questions, how they can make them personal. Now, the critters, they helped because they cared. Now, what's one way that they could do that? So asking those questions, they take it from being a fiction book where it's about little animals doing that to how can they do it? How can they take the initiative in the future when they see someone needing help, and they can show that level of caring and appreciation for someone else to emulate that in themselves, and then show others that they do care. And as I had mentioned, then even if they don't get something from it, that person will pay it forward and choose or want to be caring to someone else in the future. So it's a really good chain reaction of positivity. I felt that was my good strength, asking those questions to make real world application. That's something I strive to do when teaching and educating students. One of the challenges that I felt were that I may have asked too many questions. I asked the question once, the students got it. There might not be a need to re-ask those questions. They might, we just answered this, teacher, why are you asking us again? Maybe we were wrong, maybe we didn't understand it or answer it correctly, and they might start to doubt themselves. So as I re-watched the part A video, the read aloud, I noticed that maybe once the answer gets discussed and they hit all those main points, move on, don't reword or don't re-ask that question. It'll detract from our time and our flow that we have going on when we were reading the story. Now, for our next question, what I could do differently to improve my next read aloud, I will write down questions beforehand for the read aloud that I'm doing, and I will pick the best one, and I will pick that best question, those best questions to ask, at least 2, possibly 3 in the story at key points where will really drive home the point and the message for my students to grasp. And that way I'm not making it redundant and rewording that question and taking up time to ask another question and then be asking question after question after question instead of reading the story as I should be for my students. Something that I learned from this read aloud that I did to my students was that it definitely takes a tone of voice with differing tones depending on which character is speaking in the story. So if I'm talking for the little critter, if I'm talking for the grandma bunny, if I'm talking for the dad or the sister, I have to use a different tone of voice to make it fun and exciting. That's something that I had thought of in the middle of the story as I was reading it, but I really wish I had thought of that before. So in the read aloud of Just Critters Who Care by Mercer Mayer, as I was reading, it brought back a lot of memories as a student, and that helped me to reflect on my strengths and why I feel I'm a good teacher. When I was a young student, I learned to read because my teachers taught me. And as they taught me to read, I would read more and more. I'd always reach my AR goal. And so that love of learning, that love of knowledge, the love for books and reading, that is something I have. I have a deep desire for that. And now just reading for fun is enjoyable even as I'm older. So I feel that makes me a great teacher because a lot of our students nowadays, they need help learning English, they need help reading books, deciphering vocabulary, and I feel that the number of students now that need that help, that's something that I have, that deep desire to help students and share the knowledge that I have, to give that to my students and instill that knowledge and that love for learning and reading and vocabulary in my students. So I feel that is a great strength I have as a teacher, and I look to impart that to my students that I'll have over my career.